Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris,
And my name is James,
and we are the Formula One Bros.
just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
Yep, and we are back to kind of go over and review the 2022 Singapore Grand Prix,
Which I'm so happy Singapore is back.
oh
Oh
my
my
gosh,
gosh. It was
yeah,
nice to see that track again. Oh, it was
yeah,
great.
it's so funny. I think a lot. It's really interesting because I think a lot of younger fans that have just come into the sport in the past year or two have never experienced a Singapore Grand Prix before.
Mhm.
Like, and I'm thinking a lot of like the Drive to Survive fans, and it was really it was a great race for them. Like, I think it was a great first race back in Singapore. It was awesome, but it was really a tale of two races almost. Because the first half of the race was so boring. Just
Mhm.
it was a procession. You had Max Verstappen just kind of trying to get through the field. And
Mhm.
that was really the biggest thing that was happening was Max Verstappen trying to cut his way through the field, but it's Singapore, so it's really hard to overtake.
Yeah.
Um, and that was it. The other interesting thing you had was, Perez jumped Leclerc at the start, and then that just kind of happened. And then the second half was bonkers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was and it wasn't really like there wasn't really a whole lot of like on track passing, but there was a lot of strategy that went into, especially with the weather and when to switch to from the wet weather tires to the dry weather tires. There's a whole lot of strategy going on, and it was like a very very intense and chess match. That's kind of what it was like.
Mhm.
It was I, I related it. I thought of it as a very intense chess match rather than like I don't know, something as like something crazy, super action packed like you'll see in like an NFL football game.
Right. And I think too a lot of that drama was created by all of the virtual safety cars and safety cars. You know, good lord, sorry, you're hearing my cat. You had safety cars and virtual safety cars, drivers
Mhm.
retiring, engines blowing up, Sonoda hitting the wall, Hamilton hitting the wall,
Yeah.
you know, some crazy stuff happening. Um, so it made the conclusion to the thing, and then at the very end, you had the drama with the safety car controversy and Sergio Perez, and was there a gap to Leclerc? Like, there's a lot of drama in the closing laps, and I almost wish that it was on a timer because the race had gone, was not going to fit into the 2 hour window that the FIA prescribes for the race.
Mhm.
Um, but I almost wish we had all of those extra laps back because the ending would have just been incredible.
Oh yeah, I totally
So
agree.
it was a great Singapore Grand Prix. And with that, let's go ahead and get into our takeaways.
So we mentioned the rain delay. My first takeaway was about the rain and the rain delay. So my opinion on that um, is I get the need for a rain delay when it's like pouring, because you also need to make sure that like if if it is needed, the medical helicopter can take flight. And if it's pouring, obviously it can't. However, I think that having that delayed a full hour before the start procedures even began,
Mhm.
I think that was too long because, in my opinion, what is the point of having wet weather tires if you're just going to wait for the rain to stop and wait for the track to dry before we start racing?
Yep.
Why do we have wet weather tires? I mean, we have intermediates and full wets and extreme wets too, it like if needed. So like we have the ability to race in the rain. Why did we need to wait so long? That's kind of my thing. I get the point for like delaying it a little bit during a downpour, like because I saw videos from the track from the actual race, and it was like an obnoxious amount of rain, but like didn't need to be that long, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. I think Yeah, I think the rule with the medical helicopter is really important because that came into play after Jules Bianchi's crash in Japan. And, I think had the medical helicopter been able to take off, it may have saved his life. So I think that's a great rule. And that was the case of why in 2021, the Belgian Grand Prix was delayed so long, is because the cloud cover was such that the medical helicopter could not take off. And, and I think in theory, it's a good rule. Well, in practice, it's a good rule too. But, when we're in a situation like we were in Singapore, there was no reason why we couldn't have gone racing. Maybe, a couple minute delay, but we have full wet tires. I totally agree with you. We have full wet tires. Why didn't we use them?
And Singapore also is not a track that you're going fast enough that the spray would be as much of an issue. Like, for example, at Spa, where the track is very fast.
Yeah,
but
very dangerous.
Singapore, you don't even go up to eighth gear at any point throughout the lap. So it's, I don't know.
I agree.
Mixed opinions.
My race takeaway, one of my biggest takeaways is that, I know Red Bull kind of have this championship in hand. And I saw on Twitter, I don't know how verified this is, and I haven't looked at the math myself, but I saw someone say that if Max Verstappen wins the Japanese Grand Prix with the fastest lap, no matter where anybody else finishes, he wins the championship, like very well in hand. But it just kind of goes to show that Red Bull are not invincible. And I think if Ferrari had more of these races throughout the season, because they had a fantastic race.
Yeah.
I think Carlos Sainz was a little off the pace for their liking, but they had a fantastic race, perfect strategy. They probably would have liked Charles to stay in first, but they had a really good strategy. They had a perfect race. Carlos Sainz was able to get by Lewis Hamilton at the start. If they have more races like that, there's no reason why we couldn't be coming down to Abu Dhabi for a championship finale. There's no reason.
Yeah. And that goes into my next race takeaway is Ferrari did have a really good race today. Like they didn't get a win, but both cars on the podium. And it was looking for a bit that Charles was trying to, Charles was very, very close to passing Checo. And I think had he gotten past it, would have been Charles's win. But, it was a really, really good race for Ferrari. And you're absolutely right. Had they had more races like this throughout the season, we wouldn't be signing up. We wouldn't have, signed off on the championship 3 races ago. And as Ferrari fans and just said, well, wait till next year. So it's kind of just like, it's frustrating because it was such a good race for them, but it's like, we could have been having that throughout the whole season.
Yeah. And part of me wonders, and I know it's only one race, in a string of very poor races for Ferrari, but I'm almost wondering if this is sort of the beginning of them starting to kind of they've said externally that everything's okay, there's nothing wrong, we're not making mistakes, yada yada yada, all of that usual kind of sandbagging stuff. But part of me wonders if this is them starting to make some internal changes, maybe not even with personnel changes, but really reassessing the way that they do a Grand Prix weekend. It's curious. It's just a thought. I kind of wasn't really going anywhere with that, but they had a really fantastic race, and I'm hoping that they continue to have more. I think Japan is going to be a Red Bull track, and I think I see no reason for Max Verstappen not winning the championship next weekend. But it'll definitely be interesting to see. But yeah, great race from Ferrari. My next takeaway is that, kind of on the flip side of things, I think Ferrari, a little bit with their race pace deficit, and Mercedes, especially Mercedes having they had such a good qualifying at the hands of Lewis Hamilton and just had such a poor race today that I think that just kind of shows that though that at times it seems that it's not there, the gap between Ferrari and Mercedes and Red Bull is still, especially Mercedes to the top, even though they've made a lot of progress, there's still a pretty big gap there. And, it's not, it's not like the Mercedes of old where, the mistakes here or there, they can get away with because they're so dominant. They have to be on it 100% of the time right now, especially considering they're in a heated fight with Ferrari.
And Ferrari definitely dominated Mercedes this weekend.
Yep, for sure. Yep.
My last takeaway is just the world seems like such a happier place when Checo either gets a win or is on the podium.
Mm-hmm.
I just my heart was so full seeing Checo win at Singapore. And Checo's wins this year have come from Monaco and Singapore. Maybe we're seeing a new side of Checo that is dominating that is going to be dominating on the street circuits. From the onset, from the very first turn through turn one, it was Checo's race, the whole race. And it was just, it was so nice seeing Checo win. And, as much as I am he's racing for Red Bull as a Ferrari fan, but I love Checo. He's such a good person, really great driver. And it's taken him so long. I mean, his first season in Formula One was 2012. Yeah, 2012. Yes. He was a rookie at Sauber. And just seeing the success that he has now is just awesome.
Yeah. My thing with that is, Sergio Perez has had a stark downturn in form ever since the summer break, and he's not been, the gap between him and Verstappen has definitely increased, as I think Red Bull has pushed the development in a way that I don't think optimizes it for Max Verstappen, but it's just optimizing it in the way that Adrian Newey designs the car. And it just so happens that Max Verstappen is the best at getting out of that car what it's capable of. And, the way that, they design that car is they design it oversteery. And, Sergio Perez likes his cars understeery. But with that being said, I think there are races like this where Max Verstappen is not in contention and he goes out there and he picks up, he picks up the damage control and he puts in a race like that. I look at Monaco. Monaco was the same thing. And so I think there are those races where, maybe he doesn't win all of them, but he occasionally, he's there when Max isn't. And I think though his performance has taken a downturn, I think Red Bull is still justified in keeping him on.
Oh, absolutely.
And he's still, he's the Mark Webber to Sebastian Vettel. I think that's the way that I see their relationship. Valtteri Bottas to Lewis Hamilton. I think that's the way that I see their relationship. And I know a lot of Sergio Perez fans are not going to like it. And a lot of Red Bull fans maybe not like that, but that's kind of the way that I see their relationship. But when Max isn't there, Checo's on it. And I have no reason to see Red Bull, needing to go, look at other drivers. And I think him signing his contract is deserved.
Absolutely. He is every bit of the driver Red Bull signed him on for. So absolutely.
I have one more takeaway. I will just say,
let's hear it.
The Singapore Grand Prix. I'll save this for my hot takes. Let's move on.
Okay. So next we will take a look at our biggest losers of the week. We'll do our biggest losers, and then we'll move into our top performers of the week. I just got to say right off the bat, we were praising Checo. So on the flip side of that flip side of that coin, I have to say one of the bigger losers of the week is Max Verstappen. which is a place where he's not often. But he started 8th, dropped down to out of the points after a horrendous start, and just was not really able to make anything happen. He did have some pretty awesome overtakes towards the end of the race, but even with him starting 8th, I hadn't, before the race started, I had no doubt that, he would finish on the podium or even win the race. And he just did not race the way that we have seen him race this season.
Yeah, I agree with that. And he's on my list too. And I think that, even though he's starting 8th, which is to no fault of his own, the team just didn't fuel him for the qualifying run that he needed. So I honestly like what they did in qualifying, bring him in, just let him get 8th instead of disqualifying him and having him start 20th.
From the pit
but
lane.
even though, starting 8th, I think, a podium was still on for Max Verstappen, given his performance all year, even though it's Singapore, given his performance and the performance of the Red Bull, there's no reason that he couldn't have been on the podium.
Yeah.
Botched the start, was making some good overtakes, but also making a lot of mistakes. He was making it up through the field and then put the slicks on and, locked up and had to go change his tires, ended up out of the points. And, I think he ended up clawing himself back up to, I think it was 8th where he ended up finishing. He started where he finished. I think I don't have this results in front of me, but, I think when you look at it on paper, start to finish, you're like, oh, that's a pretty uninteresting race, but it was anything but for Max Verstappen, and a lot of it in some negative ways. And so I think that definitely, again, that just goes to show that he's not invincible. And I think Ferrari could be looking at that like, man, so many missed opportunities throughout the rest of the season. They could have been in a much better position to capitalize on that, and they weren't able to. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have to say my biggest losers, and I'm going to lump them all into one go, is Alpine and Williams, two double DNF teams. Williams, it's a bummer. I think, Nicholas Latifi just made a boneheaded move like he does every race. Alex Albon made a rare mistake. So I feel more for Alex Albon than anything. But I think this is a huge weekend of missed opportunities for Alpine, because given their performance and Daniel Ricciardo's performance, especially in this race, McLaren took home a lot of points and are now a point ahead of Alpine in the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah.
So they've now lost 4th place to McLaren, which is shocking considering where McLaren started at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I know.
Both finishing, last on the track in Saudi Arabia to finishing, where they finished today is huge. So that's really, really unfortunate. And again, it was it was mechanical problems for both.
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate.
Yep.
And I really feel bad for Fernando Alonso too, because it was his 350th Grand Prix.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And Alpine and Williams were definitely on my list of biggest losers for the week. Yeah, it's just tough I really did feel bad for those teams because they were mechanical issues. It wasn't like driver making a mistake or anything like that. It was just mechanical issues. So I really do feel for them on that. But those are my biggest losers for the week. Do you have any more to add to that list?
Not particularly. I think Yuki Tsunoda is going to be kicking himself, made it into Q3 and was doing really well. He was up there scrapping it with the Aston Martins for a lot of the race. He was putting together a really good little race and just, made a boneheaded move and ended up in the wall and crashed out. And, I think that's going to be, I think Yuki Tsunoda has been much more consistent this season compared to last season. But I think it's a sign that, it's another sign that, he still has some time to grow. I think he's still deserving of the contract that he re-signed for AlphaTauri, which is great. But yeah, I think he's going to be wishing that he had that one back.
Yeah, I agree. Cool. Well, we're moving right along. We're going to go into the top performers of the week. And Chris, I will start with you. Who are some of your top performers for the weekend?
Mine are Sergio Perez, got a great start, had the measure of Leclerc the entire race, pretty much. Yep. I don't think Leclerc was a threat at all. After the first, probably 8 laps. And, that was that for Sergio. I think he did a great job. Have to mention Daniel Ricardo finishing up in the points. He was what, like, he started what, like 18th, 16th, started 16th and ended up 5th.
Yep.
So huge day for him. That's exactly what he needed. I think, especially with all the talks around his contract, where he's going to be next year, he needed that result. Aston Martin, double points finish. McLaren, double points finish. Ferrari, double podium for them. I think, that was the best thing that they could have happened, for them. And especially, for Aston Martin, looking at the way that qualifying went, especially for Sebastian Vettel, I think, they just made, really solid opportunities, made the most out of really solid opportunities. So those are my top performers.
Yep. On a very similar vein, my top performers of the week, I just have 3 listed. I have Checo, Aston Martin, and McLaren. Because Aston, well, I'll start with Checo. Obviously, we've covered Checo. Won the race, dominated it all race long. You can't get better than that. With Aston Martin, they've have both drivers finishing in the points, which is super awesome. That's something that has rarely happened for them this season, with Sebastian Vettel finishing in 8th and Lance Stroll finishing 6th. And McLaren, Lando Norris put in a great performance, started 6th, ended 4th, but Daniel Ricciardo started 16th and ended 5th. He gained 11 positions throughout the race. I have to say Daniel Ricciardo is probably my top performer of the week, just because of where he started the race and where he ended. And Singapore is a track that it's very difficult to overtake. It's very much like Monaco, like qualifying is everything, and where you qualify is relatively where you finish, unless there's like some freak something that happens. But with Daniel Ricciardo finishing 5th after starting 16th, he's probably my top performer of the week, hands down. Awesome drive. Got McLaren double points finish. Yeah, absolutely awesome from him, which is good to see, considering, he's out of a contract next year, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I think specifically with Daniel Ricciardo, I think this is exactly what he needed. But I think what is going to happen is I don't know if it's enough, mainly because his performances have been, we said the same thing after Australia. We said the same thing after Monza in 2021, that it was these really, really good performances. And, is this a sign? Is this finally, the start of something wonderful? Is this finally, him breaking out? And we just haven't seen it. And so I'm not convinced that it was enough. I think if he has similar performances for the rest of the season, like he goes into Japan and has a really solid, weekend, gets into Q3, finishes in the points, and then, we end up going to the Americas and he does the same thing, Brazil and the US.
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi, he has some really good performances for the remaining races. I think there's no reason why, that doesn't improve his stock, but I'm wary that it's too little too late for him.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you hit the nail on the head. These performances are great, but I do think that these awesome performances are way too far and few between. If he's having a performance like this every weekend, with the occasional mishap, like I can understand, like obviously he would already have a contract next year.
Yes.
But like these performances, while they're great, they're too few and far between, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Also, I'll just mention really quickly on Aston Martin. I think specifically Lance Stroll put together a good little race for himself. And I think, he should be feeling really good about that, especially considering he's going to be, partnered up with Fernando Alonso next year. I think it's no secret that Sebastian Vettel has not been his normal self this season. I think especially since retirement, I think he's, just starting to just kind of be on his way out, which is really unfortunate. But, Lance Stroll is going to have a very tough time with Fernando Alonso next year. And I think Lance Stroll in the latter part of the season is starting to show a little bit more consistency, which is great. And I think that bodes well for him in the future. And I hope that form continues because, I don't want him to continue just kind of be a, this person, someone in Formula One that just kind of is holding a seat just because, of who his dad is, which I don't think he is. I think he is worthy of Formula One, but, he's a little too inconsistent. And I hope that, this is, the start of something for him where he can really go and compete with Fernando Alonso next year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. All righty. Well, it's about that time in the episode. We go into our hot takes of the week. Our hot takes of the week. I just have one. And this is something that I've seen a lot on social media. I've seen TikTok videos talking about this. I've seen, people conversing about this on Twitter and Instagram or whatever. And the big question is, do we think Charles is ready to win a championship? And my hot take is that he is not. I guess it's kind of a lukewarm take. I wouldn't say that's really a hot take. He is Ferrari's golden boy right now. And he has been the star of the Scuderia Ferrari for, this is his fourth year in Ferrari. He's been the star of the team. I just don't think he's ready for a championship. When you look back on on championships recently, like I'm thinking, when Sebastian Vettel was dominating Max's championship this year, Max's championship last year, all of Lewis Hamilton's championships, even before, you get even before the Sebastian Vettel era, Lewis Hamilton won his in 2008, Kimi Räikkönen in 2007, Fernando Alonso in 2005 and 2006, and all of Michael Schumacher's championships. Let me give this as an example. 2007 was the last Ferrari that we had win a championship with Kimi Räikkönen. In that championship, yes, I think it ultimately came down to one mistake. Like you can highlight when Lewis Hamilton went off the track in China and lost that race. Kimi Räikkönen beat him. But throughout the entire season, Kimi Räikkönen did everything right to capitalize on the situations that he was given. Mm-hmm. And we have not seen Charles do that yet. You look at 2008 when Lewis Hamilton won. He capitalized on every situation that he was in to have the best outcome possible. And that's not always just the driver doing that. That's help with the team too. And Ferrari and Charles have not done that. And maybe Charles is ready to win a championship, but Ferrari 100% not. But I don't even think Charles has the maturity or is ready to win a championship yet, because there have been a lot of times where he's needed to capitalize in certain situations and he just hasn't.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And I think Charles has this really interesting characteristic where when he when when his back is put up against the wall, either because, like this season, I'm looking at France, when Red Bull just has the superior machinery,
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of races in that regard in which he made mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
France, Imola, places like that where, he was the one making the mistakes. His back was up against the wall, and he just doesn't either have the equipment or whatever to make it work. He has this really nasty tendency to overdrive the car.
Mm-hmm.
And, that affects a lot of things. He doesn't manage the tires well. That leads to a lot of tire management problems. That leads to, him more prone to making stupid mistakes, like at Imola, like at France.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it when he has the equipment and the machinery to really, put himself in a position to win, like we saw in Bahrain. He's unstoppable. He
Mm-hmm.
is on that Max Verstappen level,
Oh yeah.
but it is still very much he needs the car, he needs the team, he needs a lot of things to kind of fall his way in order for him to be a really effective driver. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is what is missing from his championship caliber. You look at drivers like Sebastian Vettel when he was at Red Bull. You
Mm-hmm.
look at Lewis Hamilton. You look at Max Verstappen. The ability there to, no matter what you're faced against, to get to be completely cool, calm, and collected, do everything that you need to do and get the maximum out of yourself and the car every single time you go around you lap the circuit
Mm-hmm.
is, it's just not there.
Yeah.
I think the perfect example is Brazil 2012 with Sebastian Vettel
Mm-hmm.
and his crash, and him spinning and ending up backwards, losing, I think Christian Horner said it was like 20 or 30 points of downforce, and continued to just chip away, and despite all of that, won the championship.
Mm-hmm.
He made himself do that. He put himself in that position.
Yeah.
And I think Charles has to have a lot of other things to fall his way before he can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's
Yeah.
missing. But the crazy thing is, if you had looked at his 2020 and 2021 campaigns, you would have thought that he's ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amazing drives. I think about, 2021 Great Britain. I think about, Bahrain in 2020, getting fourth place in that refrigerator of a car.
Well, yeah, and even in Austria in 2020,
Yep.
when he was finished third.
Yep.
And another thing too, I just remember this as you were talking about it. Every single one of Charles's wins, except for one, came from when he started on pole.
Mm-hmm.
And when he didn't win, it came from second place.
Mm-hmm.
So we've only seen Charles be able to win from pole or second place. Yeah, he's great at qualifying. I mean, shoot, he got pole in Singapore. He's gotten 9 poles this season, more than any other driver this season. But like, you look at the wins, and Max has won a crap ton of wins or races this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so Charles, he can't win from outside of pole,
and
outside
that
of the front row.
Yeah, and that comes from just not being able to manage his races
Mm-hmm.
the way that, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, those kinds of drivers are able to manage.
Yeah.
And, and yeah, it's unfortunate because he is so talented. It just, when his back is against the wall, he freaks out and he tries really, really hard, and it leads to more. He reminds me a lot of Max Scherzer as a pitcher, because he is so good when he's on, but when his back is against the wall, he grips the ball harder, he throws harder, he has less touch, he loses spin rate, and he's not able to get the ball to drop when he throws like curveballs and sinkers. His fastballs are more predictable, and he just, people hit off of him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what Charles reminds me of. He just tries too hard. He can't manage the tires. Yeah, I could go on, but I agree. And I hope that first of all, I hope that Ferrari gets more on top of themselves.
Yeah.
And I hope that he can I think there's a lot to be learned for him. And I think a lot of these missed opportunities in creating a championship fight this year might have been really good lessons for him. So we'll see. Time will
Maybe we'll
tell.
see his revenge tour next year.
Yeah. My hot take is we still have so many problems with the race directing with the FIA. There's still this one. It's not been it was better than last year.
Mm-hmm. Last year was like banging your head against a brick wall.
Yeah, it was better than last year, but there's still so many times where it takes so long for decisions to get made
Mm-hmm.
that it really affects and it was particularly atrocious today. Like I'm thinking about, how I think when Alex Albon hit the wall and lost his front wing and he was able to get going. So there was there was a yellow through the turn. I think eventually it was a virtual safety car, but it was just a yellow through the turn. And the track went green while there were still marshals on. Yeah, there was a virtual safety car and the track went green while there were still marshals on the track picking up the debris. And that is absolutely unacceptable. And this whole season, where somebody crashes or something happens, the no-brainer is at least throw the VSC. If it turns into a full safety car, great, but at least, immediately throw a VSC, neutralize the race. Or if it's bad enough, like somebody hits the wall, throw a safety car. There's no reason to delay. And there has been so many times where it's been like a lap before a virtual safety car is even thrown. Then the virtual safety car is out there for a minute or two, and then they throw the safety car. It's like, and I almost wonder if it's if it's something that, they saw what happened with Michael Massey and how much he freaked out and was unable to handle the workload. And they went too far in the other direction where they have two race directors and they have this virtual referee and they have all these different tools.
Yeah, it's almost like too many cooks in the kitchen now.
I agree. I think there are too many cooks in the kitchen. And I think it's causing a delay of a lot of decisions, and it's just, I think a lot of mistakes have been corrected from last year, but it's still not enough in the right areas, I think. And this one was particularly atrocious. So I don't even know if it's a case of the FIA still has a lot to learn. If it's just they're not doing the right things to fix it. I think that's more what it is they're not fixing it in the right ways more than they still have a lot to learn. Because when Charlie Whiting was race director, I'm not saying he was perfect all the time, but you did not have these issues. You just didn't. And I'm really, I don't know where it's coming from, but the FIA still has a lot that they need to work out. And it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that concludes our conversation about the race today. But in this past week, there has been some big news in the world of F1 regarding stuff like cost cap violations. So Chris, why don't you fill us in a little bit on what's going on in that frame of the world?
Yeah.
In
So
F1.
It was super weird. It came out that it started to just be rumors that there were two teams that violated the budget cap from last year. And then it came out that those two teams were likely Aston Martin and Red Bull Racing. And this was for 2021 in particular, and the budget cap had come in in 2020, but it wasn't enforced. They were just kind of monitoring it, seeing how teams, really just for the FIA to work out a system of how they were monitoring team spending. And they have certain punishments for, well, I'll get into that. But so these rumors happened, and then it came out that Mattia Binotto and Toto Wolff had like an hours long meeting about it, and that it was definitely, Aston Martin, Red Bull Racing, they violated. And of course, F1 Twitter exploded with people being like, ban them from the championship. Mercedes are world champions, all this stuff. And everything. And then
they still were world champions last year.
Well, I'm talking mainly, stripping their calls to strip Max of his world championship and all of that stuff. And then the FIA came out with a statement that, essentially was like, we've been monitoring this situation. We have a very clear monitoring policy that we go through for all of those teams. And if teams are found to have violated the rules, it will be dealt with whatever FIA systems have, they have in place to deal with those situations. And the second part of that statement was calling out Twitter a little bit, but it was just the unnecessary and unwanted speculation surrounding all of this, basically by saying like, shut up.
Yeah.
Like, stop spreading rumors. And it's unclear who that director was. I think it was just more of a blank statement, but it was a really weird statement. And then it's kind of all died away. Like there was no conversations about it. But it also kind of came out that that Mattia and Toto were also meeting about the rate on which the Red Bull this year has developed and whether or not the Red Bull this year had exceeded the cost cap, which, is a very big accusation considering, the FIA is every upgrade is approved by the FIA, not just from a technical standpoint, but now in the cost cap era from a financial standpoint. And Red Bull has done things this year to avoid cost cap violations. Like, a lot of the floor upgrades, only Max Verstappen is running because they literally can't afford to produce the parts to put on Sergio Perez's car, which I have a whole thing about that for another time. But that's sort of what has kind of been going on in the world of this cost cap regulation. And then Sky Sports, and I think it was a good refresher because I also needed a refresher as to what sort of were the penalties and everything. And essentially there's a 5% threshold that if you exceed the cost cap by under 5%, that's what is called a minor infraction. And it's penalties from like, losing, a couple constructors points,
I think it was like
maybe some grid penalties, maybe a fine,
taking away wind tunnel time too.
Yeah. Taking away wind tunnel time and development time, like monetary fines, stuff like that. And then if you exceeded that 5%, so if you spent more than 5% of the budget cap, that's what are major infractions. And those are like exclusion from the championship, those very, very severe punishments. And that was good for me to know, just to say, okay, that there are these in place and the FIA is monitoring it very carefully. And, they don't do something like put a cost cap in, which completely alters the financial landscape of the sport and just not monitor it, So I think it'll be really interesting, and there are ongoing investigations, and this will definitely play out over the course of the season and maybe even into the off season. But I will say this: if it is found that Red Bull and Aston Martin spent a lot, they crossed that 5%, threshold, they spent more, and it's decided that they were excluded from the championship, I think that is 100% deserved. That should happen. I think if if that does happen, they need to go through with those sorts of things,
Yes. Oh,
because
100%.
if they don't, the FIA loses all credibility.
Yeah.
And that only benefits the top team, because they have a track record. The FIA has a track record of punishing the smaller teams for things that the big teams get away with.
Yeah.
And so I really truly think that even at the top levels, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, if they commit these infringements on the technical and sporting regulations, they need to be punished accordingly. On the other side of that, nobody knows if these rumors are even true.
Yeah.
So my thing is, everybody calm down. The FIA is going to deal with it accordingly. If they don't deal with it accordingly, if it finds out, that, they did these things and the FIA is not punishing them, then we can have a conversation. But for right now, it's all just rumors. A lot of it is speculation. We don't know a whole lot. I think we will know more in the coming weeks, but everybody calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever punishment they get, I think is deserved. And
Yeah.
I would say the same thing if that was Ferrari too.
Oh yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was kind of been the big news as of recently. A lot of rumors going around with that. But one thing I want to say, I was very glad to see Alex Albon racing today.
Mm-hmm.
After his scary bout with appendicitis and how the procedure went wrong. After he got his appendix removed, the appendectomy, like he needed to go on a ventilator, like he needed to be resuscitated because of complications with the surgery. And then, 2 weeks later, racing in Singapore, which is the most physically demanding race of the entire season. So, unfortunately, both Williams ended up retiring. His car, he ended up retiring from the race, but it was really good to see him racing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing is that happened in the off season. I want to talk a little bit about, or an off season. Oh my gosh. And, in the weeks that have transpired since our last episode, Yuki Tsunoda re-signed for AlphaTauri, which I think is 100% deserved. I talked about it a little bit earlier in the episode. I think it's deserved. He's been much more consistent this year. I think, with Honda still staying on as a partner of Red Bull, I think, having a Japanese driver in that team is good for the brand. I think, 100% deserved. Yuki's been much more consistent this season. Still has some stuff that he needs to work out, but it's deserved. The big story, though, with silly season, it has been all but confirmed that it is Nick de Vries to AlphaTauri and Pierre Gasly to Alpine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which was super cool to see. I was very excited to hear that Nick de Vries getting a shot. I mean, it hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but it's basically been all but confirmed. So I was really, I absolutely, Nick de Vries deserves a seat in F1.
Yep.
Especially with his performance that he put on in Monza. His performance in Monza was fantastic. So absolutely deserved. And with the rumors of Pierre going to Alpine, in my personal opinion, it's going to be so good for Pierre to get out of the Red Bull umbrella.
I agree. That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's going to be so good. I think that'll be so great for his career to finally get out of that Red Bull umbrella. And I don't want to say it was a toxic work environment, but I think he was pushed up to Red Bull too soon. He wasn't ready to be pushed up to Red Bull. And same thing with Alex Albon. They were both pushed up to Red Bull without really being ready. And they weren't really given a second shot. So I think it'll be great for Pierre Gasly.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about Pierre specifically, when he had his, thing at Red Bull and, he was demoted, it went so poorly for him internally with the team that it was very clear from very early on that they would never give him the time of day ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And they've just kind of been putting him in AlphaTauri because, he's good for the team, but there were never ever intentions of promoting him to Red Bull. And I think they were going to keep him in the team as long as they could until they found somebody else to replace him.
Yeah.
And so I think just having that kind of pressure, but also, just cloud of negativity surrounding him at the team. I think being out of that system for him is going to be spectacular. I hope it is with Alpine because it's a great team that I think has a lot of potential. Of course, they've had a lot of potential since they've come into the sport and not capitalized on any of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Since 2016. But I think it could be great. He's a good team leader. My concern is that him and Esteban Ocon don't get on. But they're going to have to find a way to make that work because I think that's a great place. And it's good for the brand. It's an all French lineup and a French team, which I think is going to be great. So I think that's all really great moves. And that still leaves Haas and Williams with seats to fill. I think at Williams, they should, if they really are not considering Daniel Ricardo, then I think they need to put Logan Sargent in the car if he can qualify for a super license. The trick there is the last F2 race event is not until Abu Dhabi, so they're not going to know who's going to be able to fill that Williams spot until after the season. If Logan Sargent, he's like second or third in the championship. And I think if he stays there, if top four, finishing the top four of the championship qualifies you for your super license, gives you the 40 points necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, if he finishes where he does, is a solid weekend in Abu Dhabi, qualifies for a super license, I think Williams should definitely put him in the car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. That just leaves who's going to
go to Haas.
Who's going to go to Haas.
And I'm not even going to try and predict that for my life because that team is very unpredictable.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
So, but that is everything from the Singapore Grand Prix. We will be back next week to talk about the Japanese Grand Prix.
Yes.
Make sure you like and subscribe on all of our social medias, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Take care, everyone.